Imagine being paid to betray someone you had followed for years. Not thousands of coins, not a fortune, just 30 pieces of silver. Judas Iscariot accepted that payment to hand Jesus over. But what happened to those 30 pieces of silver after Jesus was condemned? And why does the Bible give us two accounts that seem to describe what happened to Judas and the field bought with the money? Today, we're going to follow the story from Judas's betrayal to the mysterious field of blood. Judas Iscariot was one of the 12 disciples chosen by Jesus. He traveled with Jesus, heard his teachings, and witnessed many recorded events. But according to the gospel accounts, Judas eventually went to the chief priests and asked what they would give him for handing Jesus over. Matthew tells us that they agreed on 30 pieces of silver. Judas then looked for an opportunity to identify Jesus to those who wanted to arrest him, and the sign he gave them was a kiss. That moment became one of the most famous betrayals in history. Jesus was arrested and taken to the authorities. Matthew tells us that Judas later saw that Jesus had been condemned, and then something changed. Judas became remorseful. He returned to the chief priests and elders and said that he had betrayed innocent blood, but they refused to take responsibility for his regret. Judas then threw the silver into the temple and left. Matthew says that Judas went away and hanged himself, and now the story of the 30 pieces of silver takes another strange turn. The chief priests picked up the silver, but they didn't put it into the temple treasury. Why? Matthew says they considered it blood money, so they decided to use it to buy a piece of land known as the Potter's Field, intending it as a burial place for foreigners. Matthew says that this was why the place became known as the Field of Blood. The money Judas received ended up connected with a burial field. The book of Acts gives us another description of Judas and the field. Peter explains that Judas had been the guide for those who arrested Jesus. Then Acts says that Judas was associated with acquiring a field with the payment he received for his wickedness. It then describes Judas falling headlong there and suffering a terrible death. The field became known as Akeldama, meaning field of blood. If Matthew says the chief priests bought the field, why does Acts describe Judas as buying it? This is one of the interesting questions. Some understand the accounts as different perspectives. Judas supplied the money, while the priests completed the purchase. Others discuss differences in the details of the two accounts. The important thing is not to pretend the texts say exactly the same thing. They don't. The Bible does not tell us what happened to each individual coin, but Matthew gives us the important chain of events. Judas received the silver. He returned it. The priests regarded it as blood money, and the money was used to purchase the Potter's Field. That field became associated with the name Field of Blood. So those 30 pieces of silver became part of one of the darkest stories. 30 pieces of silver wasn't presented as a huge fortune. In Matthew's account, the amount has biblical significance. Matthew connects the 30 pieces with a prophecy attributed to Jeremiah, while the wording also draws on imagery associated with Zechariah. This is one reason the 30 pieces are so important in Christian interpretation. The story isn't really about the value of the money. It's about the value placed on Jesus. A person was betrayed for a relatively small payment. But perhaps the most powerful part of the story isn't the silver. It's Judas's regret. He realized what he had done, but instead of turning that regret into hope and seeking forgiveness, the story ends in despair. The New Testament presents Judas as someone who was physically close to Jesus, yet made a devastating choice. And that makes his story more than an ancient mystery. It becomes a warning about greed, betrayal, guilt, and the consequences of our choices. So what happened to the 30 pieces of silver? According to Matthew, they ended up being used to purchase the Potter's Field. And the mystery of Judas doesn't end with the coins. It leaves us with a much bigger question. What do we do when we realize we've made a mistake? If you enjoy Bible stories, history, and biblical mysteries, subscribe to Bible Stories and Mysteries for the next story.